Welcome, everyone, to Meetings and Miles. I'm Pamela, and this is my co host, Mark. How are you today, Mark?
Hey, Pamela, I love a good follow up. The other day, someone reached out to me just to tell me that they don't have an update. And you know what? That was perfect because it didn't leave me waiting. It didn't leave me in the lurch. I knew where I stood. It was awesome. And actually, that kind of ties in with our topic today. Pamela, tell the good folks at home what we're going to be talking about.
Oh, I do love a good follow up as well. And that does lead us into today's topic, which is when it comes to business travels, there's often business networking.
Nice. Networking is such a huge part of travel, and we have to do it so often at different events and activities. What are some of your thoughts, Pamela? What's do you have some tips and tricks and key insights into good networking?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, networking, I always get really excited to go to an event. So I believe that brings out my extroverted side, but I'm a little bit of a hybrid that often there are sometimes I really have to rely on my pre-planning and my experience and all those various opportunities to pull on to really get as much as I can out of an event. And I think that really comes to looking at the various stages of pre-planning for these types of events when you're going to a conference or a trade show or whatnot. And then you have the plan while you're there at the event. And then, of course, there's the post follow up as well.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. Tell me about the pre-planning because I've spent so many years hearing people who just, oh, I need to go to this event because there's going to be all these great people here, and like that's going to be my first introduction to them is when I get to the event. Are you saying that there's more to it than that?
Yes, for sure. I mean, absolutely. There's the people out in industry that have been in the same industry for years and years and years, and they can often just show up and be the belle of the ball, so to speak, with minimal prep work. But for most of us, it is very beneficial to do our work beforehand, and that can be involving some pre-research. So understanding the conference you're going to and who might be there if you happen to have been to that conference before, re-looking at who you met previously, see if they're going to be returning. There's a lot of opportunity to do virtual networking before in-person networking. So whether that's through LinkedIn, through emails, through Zoom and Teams calls, to really warm up the relationship ahead of time so that you can really hit the ground running when you get to the event.
Cool. So can I just, if I have the list of attendees who are coming to an event, can I look up somebody and email them and say, hey, do you want to meet for lunch on day two? Is that how it works?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's worth a shot, but it also depends if you've met that person before, where your relationship is at. As like if you've been at a conference for 2 days and you only have so much time to meet certain people and you've never met someone before, a lunch might be a big ask. But having that opportunity to potentially meet at a booth quickly or just say, hey, I see we're both going to be at this event. If there's a quick moment that we can just say a quick hello, I'd really welcome it and looking forward to meeting you there. That might be a better approach, but you never know. There is future opportunities. For sure, you're going to be filling your luncheon, your meal slots with different people.
Those are some really great points. Then what happens? What's your advice? So you're at the event, you're starting to, you're at the wine and cheese, say in the evening, starting to meet people. What's your approach there?
There's like a lot of various approaches, and it'll really depend on the different events. There can be when you go to a conference, there's conference hosted events. Sometimes there are external events that are associated with a conference hosted by different people. Perhaps you yourself, if you belong to a larger organization and you are hosting the event. which really, when you're the one that's hosting, that's a tremendous opportunity because you will be involved in inviting the people, you will have warmed them up. You're the host, so that gives you an opportunity to connect with everyone, welcome them, see how they're doing, and if you can do anything for them, and see where the conversation goes. But generally, for any event, you want to be present, you want your phone away, you want to be available and open to the possibilities of running into different people that you may know. And again, if you've had that opportunity to meet them virtually ahead of time, it's always a great opportunity just to walk up and introduce yourself in person, because once you have that in-person connection, that really helps strengthen the opportunities moving forward.
No, that's awesome. And I know I've been to lots of different networking events over the years. And typically, in my experience, and I'll get your thoughts on this too, is you're probably not hitting a home run the first time you get there. I've often found it takes about three times going to an event before you really have a strong connection. Like do the follow up or the pre work as you've talked about, then you meet those people at the first event, and that's all great. And then a year later, say you meet them at another event, well, then you've actually got that connection. Maybe they become your conference buddy. You get to know them a little bit. But then by the third time you've met them, say another event, then you're usually, if you're doing it right, you should have a pretty decent, strong relationship by then. Does that resonate with you?
Oh yeah, absolutely does. It can almost be to a detrimental, say, if you get some really good conference buddies, but they're not necessarily your business opportunities. You have to make sure, because they can be your safe harbor that you just want to like laugh and carry on with them. But it is honestly, it's truly a really great place to have it. Because even if you can go to an event with the first time and bring someone you know, which I think we're going to also chat about later, but honestly, when they are your people, that your customers and clients and whatnot, before they can become that, or even if they are, but you're new in the relationship, it does take some time to get those points that you can enter an event with confidence that you're going to know people and you're going to be able to connect with different people. But that being said, there are opportunities even before, like, those official networking events. If you're at a conference and you're at a keynote or you're going to workshops, there's those points that you'll be meeting or sitting beside people, or even at meals if it's conference hosted meals, that you can introduce yourself and get to know people in that way as well too. And it's exceptionally, I love it when conference people do this as well, that with the name tags that indicate if people are buyers or sellers. So then you also have a little bit of an indicator of who you're talking to. Often I'm a seller. So when I see a fellow seller, I'm still going to talk to them and introduce myself, but just, maybe you can get some industry insights, and everyone's your potential friend. But then when you know that they're a buyer, then you can also, change your approach with that as well too. Understanding buyers are often used to getting approached by many, many different people, but just keep it kind of loose and high level, just like you would meet anybody, even outside of a business situation. Just start with introductions. How are you doing? How are you finding the events so far? What's keeping you busy these days? That kind of thing.
Well, that's awesome. And you reminded me, I've had people come up to me at conferences and like grab my name tag to look what color stamp is on it. Uh, so they knew exactly where they stood.
Yeah, that's a little bit assertive. I know, and it is that awkward, like you see people's eyes are like, hey, my eyes are up here, but they're just trying to get a quick look at your badge to see where you're from or who you are, if they're supposed to remember who you are. But that's all part of the game.
Yeah. Something I've really had to work on over the years is remembering people's names. I
Mm.
could have just met somebody and completely forgotten what they've told me their name is. And it's, that can be embarrassing especially if you're looking back at their name tag. So the very common strategy you hear about, I try to employ, and it really works, is repeating their name back, two or three
Mm.
times during the conversation, just to help it stick in your brain. It's a great trick. It works really well, and it's hugely necessary, especially for those events where you may be meeting lots of different people about, lots of different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we as humans like hearing our names. There's something to it. Like if you're like, "Hey, Mark, how's it going? How are you doing? What's Mark up to these days?" I don't know. I like hearing the Pamela thrown in there.
Well said, Pamela.
Thank you, Mark. And also for me too, when it is one of those larger events and you're meeting a ton of different people, after the conversation I'll often pull out my Apple Notes on my phone and take a few notes of what we talked about and what I'd like to follow up with them on. I think there's a great opportunity when you do speak with people to exchange business cards, although I've been finding more recently going to events and exchanging LinkedIn information, like just pulling up the platform and connecting on LinkedIn right away, which is a great way to have that social media connection moving forward. And often, even during events, I mean, this is so common now, but to grab some photos, some videos, tag locations, tag the event, anyone maybe you met who's in the photo, that can also bring attention to, like, hey, I'm at this event, and hey, here's my takeaways, which could also funnel in some potential other connections, even outside of that. Maybe you didn't even get a chance to meet with them in person, but you have that thing in common.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding a common area of connection, I think, is incredibly important. So, similar to you, I take a lot of notes. It would be kind of awkward and weird to take notes while you're talking to someone. So, you need to jump away for a half second and take your notes afterwards. And it's not just about who they are and what they do. It's keeping a note on what is that area of connection, what is you've got to give yourself a reason to follow up with them later about something that's not necessarily you trying to sell them something.
Yes, yes. Like give the relationship some space to grow. And I think too, when you are, having these warm ups, we're talking about doing the chatting and whatnot. And then when it does come to the point, like, so Mark, what do you do, or what is your role, or who you work with? You come prepared with what your little elevator pitch is for what you do. And I think there's various ways that you can do that. Become prepared.
What are some examples of how to create a elevator pitch of what you do?
It's very interesting because I think this has evolved for me throughout time. So I used to be very much like, I am the sales director for X company and I'm based in Canada, and then that would spark various, oh, I've worked with that company, or oh, I've been to Canada, or, those different things. Now that I have my own business, I've started off with naming a little bit of a pain point, followed by a process and then a solution. So I found that this has really resonated when I say, hey, well, when you go to an event like this and you meet somebody, but then you lose that connection, I help you stay in touch. And I essentially do this through LinkedIn connections and spicy bite sized email campaigns. And
Right.
that really gets people, yeah, interested because they're like, yeah, I meet people at events and I lose contact with them. And it gets them thinking.
Yeah, you definitely want to create a scenario that will foster a further conversation. Like in my years in higher education recruitment, initially I would have started off was I in international student recruitment, which is very factual but also kind of boring. I over the years I evolved that into saying something to the effect of, I help international students succeed in a system that wasn't designed for them, which often
Yes.
ended up begging the question, well, what do you mean? How does that work? And suddenly you're into a pretty good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. I rattled off my script earlier, but really just like leading with the beginning answer or the beginning pitch of being like, when you've been in the scenario and people can relate to that, or they've, looking to solve that particular thing. That's a really good way to engage on what you work on. You can work on it into levels and layers. But even as we're talking about this, Mark, I know there's people that really, really do not like networking. Like they know they have to do it. We all know it's all part of the game. But what do you say to those people?
Well, I see one of those people in the mirror every day. So that's definitely who I am. And it is for sure something that does not come naturally to me. Yet I've done lots of networking events and think I've been fairly successful at them. And the trick there is being very prescribed in how you approach it. And what I mean by that is I will probably have two or three stories in my back pocket, some, things
Mm.
I can tell about my trip over, what's happened, something exciting. I'll also have some very specific questions ready to ask other people. And beyond the who are you and what do you do, questions that can lead to a better conversation. Things like, what do you love about what you do, or what inspired you to get into this kind of work? Things of that nature, which can really, I think, help create a more natural conversation. I'm also one to try to find a conference buddy. So sometimes I may work the room with somebody else. And if you're with somebody and you're both working the conversation, it can be a lot easier than trying to carry the conversation on your own.
I think that is great advice. And I think there's different ways that you can just even pre practice this. Like if it's really outside your comfort zone, one thing that I like to talk about, and I actually participate myself, is attending clubs like Toastmasters, where you can practice your speaking. There's a session called Table Topics where you have to think on your feet, but it just gets you practicing to be able to navigate different situations like this and to have some stories ready to go and to be able to share at a moment's notice. And even as we talk about business travel, the stakes will often feel bigger when you are at these events and conferences and whatnot. But you can even start more locally at home and go to smaller events or even things with lower stakes that there isn't necessarily even business opportunities, although business opportunities can come up all the time. But just to practice it, just meeting different people in different ways, making friends at scale.
Yeah,
Doesn't have to be so serious.
that's totally bang on. And it could be things like you're starting up a conversation at the grocery checkout.
Mm, yeah.
Things like that. I will often, when I'm checking out at the grocery store, I'll ask the person, so what's the best part of your day? And it's remarkable how many interesting conversations I've got into just based on that question.
That's awesome. And I think too, to our point that we were talking about before, it's like, as you say, like the prepping and the being able to connect virtually, because sometimes people are more comfortable with the virtual connection. Like I know I meet people virtually that are explanation points and emojis, and then I meet them in real life and they're a little bit more quieter and reserved. And like that's completely fine. Like I think it's just a way to warm up that connection ahead of time. And of course, you're still going to go into situations that are cold and you're meeting for the first time. But just know that everyone is in the same boat. Everyone is there or has been there if you're newer to it, that people understand each other and all know that that's why they're there. And I think just it sounds cliche and I hate saying it, but I'm going to say it. It's just be yourself. Just be yourself. Whatever that you love talking about somebody, but honestly, it's not even like talking yourself. It's really what we should have been, mentioning even earlier than this. It's all about listening, asking a good question and then listening and letting them talk and hearing what they have to say or what they're excited about or what they're working on.
Yeah, one of my favorite phrases is, are you listening to understand or listening to respond?
We
And
all are guilty of that, of listening to respond.
right,
Yes.
absolutely. And so try to listen to understand and get somebody else's point of view. I think that's very helpful. And in those conversations as well, I'm always looking for cues for reasons to follow up with a person later.
Mhm. Mhm.
What can I do that isn't necessarily me trying to sell them something or I need something from them, but just to show that I was really actively engaged in the conversation.
Yeah, so that's like very interesting, Mark. Like, what have you done? Like, say you have a really great connection with somebody. This one is like a really hot prospect, somebody you want to continue that relationship with after the event. What is your go-to?
I, I've got a few different ones. I'll often ask people, like, have you read anything good lately? And
Mm.
if they've told me, they tell me about some book, and if I haven't read it, I will go pick up that book, read it, and then follow up with them after and say, hey, Pamela, you recommended this book. It was really good, and this is what I really enjoyed about it. But maybe you're not a big reader. You didn't tell me something I could read. I may glean from your interests and stumble on an article that I've read that I want to send you. Hey, we talked about this. I think this dovetails into what we were saying. Or I love podcasts, so I may
Mm.
want to send them a favorite episode of a podcast that seemed to relate to our conversation. So your favorite episode of Meetings and Miles could be in somebody's inbox right now.
Oh yeah, that's like guaranteed to keep the relationship going, Meetings and Miles
Guaranteed
podcast.
success.
Excellent. But I mean, even as okay, so as we're going along, we've talked about preparing, we've talked about when you're there. There's also the follow-up game, which we've alluded to. So definitely after a networking event or a trade show or a conference, you must, absolutely must do your follow-ups. And they make them genuine, reference something you spoke of, if you can add some value right out of the gate. You don't necessarily need to jump in the salesy part unless that was something that you talked about that they were genuinely interested, like, yes, send me the info. And like doing a call to action in these follow-ups if you can set up another virtual coffee one day soon.
Right. Those are great examples of follow up. And someone told me once, they said, have your picture in your email signature line. And I just immediately brushed that off. I said, that's stupid. But then I thought about it. Well, no, that's actually a great idea because someone emails you, you may not remember having met me. I'm like, and then you're like, oh, yeah, that bald guy. Uh, reference what you talked about. And I think the email, sending the thank you email is a minimum, but finding ways to keep connected with people in ways that isn't you asking for something, that is what's critical here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is like gets into my wheelhouse as well too. I think leveraging LinkedIn and social platforms, LinkedIn especially for B2B or like often with business professionals is your go-to platform to use to connect with people. And then that does get your photo in the mix. So they were like, oh yeah, that Mark guy, I remember meeting him. But that also just helps you stay top of mind. If you're doing posts about the event afterwards, that could also be a cue if they're following along. And then additionally, from like a marketing perspective, if you have a good introduction with them and able to lead them into your email funnel, so you can also have continuous touch points and top of minds based on that as well. Again, keeping it valuable and personable and even entertaining if you can is a really great way to nurture those relationships.
And I know, Pamela, some things that people really find awkward in a networking type setting is how do you leave a conversation? You're having a great
Mm.
conversation with someone, but you've got 15 other people you need to talk to. How do you get out of that conversation? What are some of your strategies there?
Oh, I have been in these conversations that somebody is incredibly passionately explaining, you name it, their last moose hunt, potentially something business related. And I do know that this is a great conversation, but I do have to mix and mingle. I will often just say, this has been a fantastic conversation. I have to actually just go meet my colleague quickly now, is often my exit strategy. But then at the same time, keep it upbeat and positive that hey, I really enjoyed this. Can we please pick it up another time? If you do want to pick it up later as well, you can just also just leave it a little bit more like, oh, I hope to run into you later. But to how to gauge that, I think going to go see your colleague, I've heard some people say, I need to go to the washroom, whatever you're comfortable with.
I like that a lot, and I do something very similar. It's very direct, like, please excuse me, I need to go talk to somebody. And then I'll close it off with a call to action, like, hey, I'll follow up with you on this thing that we spoke about. And but the important thing is you better do the follow up that you said. And something else I've learned too is in psychology, there's that term recency bias, whereas people will remember the most, the last part of an interaction or an event. If you look at Yelp reviews, it's often about the end of the service, right? They screwed up my invoice, they messed up. It's that last thing. So try to pick a time to leave on a high note. Say someone's just told a funny story or something really interesting. Use that as your opportunity to move on from that conversation, because that's, you've left on a high note. They're thinking good things about you. Don't wait until you've stuck your foot in your mouth to then have to shy away from the conversation.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
experience talking.
Yeah, no, we've all been there. And I think there's also, just from experience as well too, and it's even come up even more recently, is having a cue for somebody to also remember you by. When a particular friend spoke on that she has a resting friendly face, another friend has remarkable, curly red hair, that she's very memorable from that. And different people too. Just recently, a connection of mine on LinkedIn talked about wearing a school shirt, that somebody like mentioned that to him at a networking event, like, do you work for school? It's like, oh no. But then they ended up talking about it because that was a major platform they used. And actually, as a quick story and all of this as well too, I was once at an event in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and there was this lovely dinner happening, maybe the first night, and there was all this entertainment and dancing that people kept getting brought up to the stage to dance. And I was very adamantly avoiding being one of the people to go up and dance.
Say it isn't so.
I know. It just was not feeling like my comfort spot to dance in front of a whole bunch of colleagues. And we're all suited up, of course. So, anyways, after a while, everyone at my table had gotten up, that I was like, okay, fine, I will go up on the dance.
Please
And
tell me
this, of
there's
course,
video.
there there is video, but you will never see it. Nobody will see it. But anyways, I get pulled up there, but this is right when they decide to switch the program, that I and another person did this special dance. There was another gentleman that was attending the conference as well too, and then we went through this like mock like wedding, like not he and I getting married, but I was standing up with like this bride that I just met. It was this whole thing, and I think my face was like the shade of a tomato. I was just so not embarrassed, but just so out of my comfort zone. But I will tell you, the next day at my booth, everyone dropped by like, hey, you were the woman that was up on the stage. And I got to tell you that I got a lot more conversations out of that. I didn't even have to worry about conversation starters. So, I mean, turning like lemons into lemonade, you got to make the best of it.
Huh. Now I've made an ass of myself at plenty of conferences, but yet never has that resulted in more business. And to our listeners out there, if we can get 1,000 downloads of this episode, Pamela will post the video. You heard it here first.
Oh, we'll have to dig up the video if that actually happens. But oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, it was, but I mean, this is what I mean. You got to just kind of go with it, roll with it. You never know what's going to happen. And I mean, at the time, flustered, but now, I'm laughing about it. It was a great memory.
But it's one of those, something that's memorable, it's remarkable, it's a little bit different. So yeah, I can see how that would be memorable for sure.
So, we've had a really great conversation today. I really love talking about networking. We talked about the pre, the journey, the post, what you do, some good, bad, and otherwise. But Mark, do you have a tip of the day for us?
I absolutely do. The tip of the day today is know an airline's and government flight cancellation policy. What a
Hmm.
lot of people don't know is if your flight is delayed by a certain amount of time, quite often the local aviation authorities are require the airlines to pay you compensation if you're delayed. And
Hmm.
that could be in Canada, it could be anywhere from a few $100s to up to $1,000 for longer delays. And that is if it is the airline's fault. They will of course always find reason that it's not their fault to be the delay, but if it's mechanical or something within their control, you may be entitled to cash compensation. They're not going to remind you of this. You need to go on their website and apply for it. I have certainly received it a number of times. So if you're delayed, it's their fault. Figure out how to get paid. And that is our tip of the day. Once again, if any of our listeners out there have a tip of the day that they would like to share, please send it to us and you may be featured on a future episode. So, Pamela, how do the good folks listening know how to find us?
Amazing, Mark. I love that tip of the day. All right, everyone can find us on LinkedIn, Meetings and Miles, as well as Pamela Wilton and Mark Peters' personal LinkedIn profiles.
Nice. And we'll have links to those in the show notes. Thanks again for joining us on another great episode of Meetings and Miles.
Safe travels, everyone.
Bye.